بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, dear viewers, to NASIMCO Mental Health with our 6th episode of Women's Mental Health. Inshallah, we'll be exploring mental health issues faced by women and with our partners of Nasiha Mental Health, NASIMCO and Ahl al-Bayt TV. Welcome again. My name is Berak Hussain. I'm a psychotherapist, and joining us today, inshallah, will be Sister Anisa Diab and Zakira Latifa Samji. This is such an important and interesting topic to explore when we take a look at the various stages that women go throughout their lives, from early childhood, young adulthood, perhaps marriage, middle life, and into the elderly stages. Inshallah, today we're going to be exploring the different challenges from a spiritual, religious, as well as a mental health perspective for each of these stages, especially given that 47% of women are considered at high risk of developing mental health disorders compared to 36% of men. Also, women tend to experience more concurrent mental health disorders. For example, depression might be accompanied by anxiety, agoraphobia, feeling unsafe, panic disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorders, for example. So before we begin, I'd like to welcome our dear sisters and introducing their backgrounds. So Sister Anisa Diab has a master's degree in community counseling with a bachelor's in psychology. She is a national certified and distance credentialed counselor. Anisa is a national speaker and expert on Muslim mental health, relationship coaching, and issues pertaining to parenting, suicide prevention, and Islamophobia. I'm a huge fan of Sister Anisa Diab, and I've had the pleasure of working with her as well. And so previously, Sister Anisa worked as a therapist at various campus counseling centers, and she also was a coordinator for the Stand For You suicide prevention program at Salisbury University's Counseling Center. Later, Anisa worked as a crisis counselor for National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and now she works in private counseling, where you can always reach out to her to do that, which I constantly refer people to her. Joining us also is Zakira Latifa Samji, who was born in Zanzibar and completed her secondary education in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Migrating to Canada in 1985, she pursued her studies in accounting. Her migration to Canada during her teenage life led her to experience the Western culture firsthand and raise questions of her own identity and religion. Her search to find answers led her to 4 years of studying at Hawz al-Ilmiya, Imam al-Asr in Medina, New York, followed by further 4 years at Jamiat al-Zahra in Qom, Iran. Zakira Latifa was honored with a degree in Islamic Studies in 1996. Now returning back to Canada, she joined Seneca College and obtained a diploma honors in social service work. She continued to pursue her post-secondary education at Ryerson University, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in social work, a beautiful combination of both religious and spiritual, as well as with social work, mashallah. Zakira Latifa combines her love for religion and her knowledge in social work by conducting seminars and workshops for mainstream healthcare and social service providers on cultural awareness and issues that affect Muslim families. She gives lectures and recites majalis, both locally and globally, on different topics in Islam, in various languages as well. She's had the privilege to humbly serve communities in Australia, Ghana, Iran, America, and Tanzania. Welcome both dear Sister Zakira and dear Sister Anisa. It's a pleasure to work with you and see you again.
Thank you.
Inshallah, we're gonna get right to it, as there's so much to cover with this dynamic topic, and each one of these topics that we're going to be exploring through is a session or a whole conference on itself. So we are going to try and be succinct and get to the point, but and please do join us on YouTube, sending us questions. So for the Ahl al-Bayt TV viewers, you can send in your questions on the YouTube NASIMCO site right now, where we're live as well. And for those who are on Facebook, you can send it through YouTube. So you can join us in this discussion. We'd like to make it very interactive as well. So inshallah, let's start with mental health issues around being a young girl growing up. So we see that culture has a huge impact when in a family or a child that's being raised with different values and the lands that you could be living in away from where you were originally from. And there's also the impact of social status and that how that impacts the young girl. So briefly, Sister Zakira, can you give us a bit of an overview on your thoughts around this topic in terms of how culture and being raised in a family with different values can impact a young girl growing up? Go ahead, Sister Zakira.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, dear sisters, dear viewers, and it's a great pleasure to be here and an honor, and especially talking about depression and mental health in the Muslim communities. As we said, that there are so many challenges that we Muslim women go through that can cause depression and mental health, and one of them is the kind of culture that we're living in, and the culture that we are in, and the society that we're living in. That our culture is asking us for something, our religion is asking us to do something, and then the land that the society, the country that we're living in is asking us to do something else. This by itself can cause depression and mental health. So what to do then? Like the big question is what to do. And number one, we need to keep in mind that we are Muslims first. And to be Muslim, it means that you need to connect with the source. We need to keep in mind that we are the body, the mind, and the soul, right? So when our soul is connected to ourself and is connected to the source meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we need to keep in mind that we need to connect with Allah on a 24/7 basis. Then the culture and the religion and the society, no matter what they throw onto us, will not kick us away completely, will not take us away completely. We might be able to go through the challenges, but then we are connected with the source, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So keeping in mind as well that culture is a very, very important part of us. We grow in culture, and religion does not take away our culture. When Islam came, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not take away people's culture. He respected people's culture. However, we need to keep in mind the differences between culture and religion.
So, Sister Zakira, how do you see that impacting a young girl's life? Because of course this impacts you in different stages, but for young girls growing up, let's say in the West, how do you find that this impacts a young girl's development? Because she could see different things going to elementary school, daycare, and how that impacts the home and her development as a young child. How do you see that?
Okay, so I will be very specific to give a specific example. For example, of a hijab, right? And our clothing. So if parents start dressing up this young girl at a very young age in an Islamic way, but yet they're doing it in a very, very nice way. And then this girl goes, I mean, I'm putting it in a positive way, but let me go and put it in another way. If the girl sees that she has to wear hijab, and hijab is made to be mandatory for her, and then she goes to school, and she goes to a school where she's the only one, all her friends are Westerners, she can see herself that she does not fit into this kind of society, right? That by itself can bring depression to her. Mm-hmm. The feeling of not being able to fit in. Right? But if hijab is made into a very, very, like this is our clothing, right? This is how we are, and be explained to this young girl. And then sometimes when she's not in the non-mahram environment, she's in women-only environment, if this girl is allowed to dress up nicely and look good, then that feeling will not be so much there. You know, she will be able to express herself as a woman, because we as girls, as women, we want to dress up nicely, we want to look good, we want to have that sense of, you know, looking good. And religion does not take that away from us, alhamdulillah, right? And subhanallah, in all the cultures, you will find that our masajids are built like that the men sit separate and the women sit, we sit like separately, so that we women can have that way of expressing ourselves, of dressing up the way we like, of coming in the masajid and in having like women only gatherings, and we can even remove hijab and we can sit the way we like. We are able to express ourselves, right? So we need to keep that part in mind, that hijab, yes, it can be a source of depression and mental health to some if it is not given the right way, if it is not worn the right way.
Thank you
I
so
hope
much.
I made it clear.
I know it's like there's so much to discuss, so it's hard to put our mind specifically what on that, but that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you, dear sister. How about you, Anisa? What are your thoughts on this, especially having a young girl yourself and seeing that, and how Sister Zakira has seen so many of our young women over the generations, like just trying to fit in. And that's a big issue that we find sometimes with the young girls, where they see something at home and they see something outside the home, and then it's almost part of their developing identity. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I have a daughter who's 5 and very, very curious now about hijab, and sometimes wanting to go out and be like mommy now and wear it, which is just such a beautiful thing to see, alhamdulillah. And I try to encourage that in such a positive way when we talk about that and we have these discussions. But you know, when I'm speaking to clients who you know, are struggling with this issue, many times what they tell me is that, you know, they are following certain values at home and they're trying to fit in with their friends at school, but can't understand why their friends' parents allow them to do certain things and then they can't do certain things, because at that young, you know, age of a girl, like the adolescent age, the teenager age especially, it's all about peer relationships. And I think it differs a little bit, like we talked about the intergenerational gap that occurs sometimes, right, between where our parents grew up and where they're coming from, and then trying to raise kids in this country, is that a lot of those cultures are collectivist cultures where it's very family oriented, family driven. Whereas when you look at the American culture, it's more value is on independence. And you see that in the children who grow up here, is that they really value their peers' opinions, more so even than their own parents. And there is that culture here that I think parents who are trying to raise children in this country need to realize, that, you know, you really have to know who your child is befriending and encourage them in the right direction to choose friends that are going to help them evolve into healthy young adults who are going to be encouraging of their faith. It doesn't matter if they're Muslim or not. You know, you find that sometimes even non-Muslims can be more supportive of a person's decision to wear hijab or to embrace their faith. But it's about, I think, what the key is really knowing who your children are hanging out with, encouraging them in the right direction, having conversations about self-confidence, how they feel about their body, their self-esteem, especially in relation to their friends at school, and connecting, making time for our kids to have that that one-on-one of, you know, help me understand what's going on right now at school between your friends. What are you struggling with? What are some of the obstacles that you feel that you might be facing, especially as a young Muslim in this country?
And that makes a lot of sense with the clash, again, the home and school. And this brings us to, you know, as a young child who, before the age of hijab, how we introduce it to them. And I hear this a lot from parents. How do you get your child to start wearing hijab from Islamic values, where they're bombarded with so much outside? Like, how do you create that love, right? And so this brings us to a young adult where there is a lot of stigma, there's a lot of misconceptions, and how these insecurities for these young women, how it starts very young. I mean, you hear that even as young as 8-9-year-old girls who are concerned about body image issues, saying things such as "I'm fat." And it's scary to hear that young girls use that kind of language. Or even we've heard issues around sadness and having thoughts of ending their lives even as young as that age. So there's a lot to around that age group already that's developing that perhaps generations before, because they weren't, let's say, exposed to the same challenges and problems that we are experiencing these days, that you see they have different mental health issues these days, right? So there's a lot around insecurities in terms of how do we empower young girls, and also looking at body image issues, fat shaming, and how there are lots of eating disorders. So I'll ask with Sister Latifa first, in terms of how do we empower young girls when it comes to, let's say, hijab and stigma. And you started off beautifully in terms of Islam is Islam, wherever you are, no matter what the culture is. But just a few ideas around that from a religious perspective. How do we empower young women from a spiritual, religious point of view to embrace and kind of work through these insecurities?
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I strongly believe that it really, really depends upon parents themselves. How parents, number one, their own, I'll use the word akhlaq, okay? Their own akhlaq, their own mannerism. Because when we look at self-esteem, it's really not, I mean, there was a research that was conducted years ago, and the conclusion that was found in that research is that the self-esteem and the self-image of children is being built by their own parents, more so. So it is really how you as a parent, you behave yourself with yourself to begin with, right? How you view your own religion. There are lots of women, there are lots, and I'm gonna just say women, but it, like we include men as well. There are lots of Muslims who are Muslims who act as Muslims, but they really do not love Islam as such, right? And their children can see it, right? Our children, I mean, we human beings are so transparent that our children can read us more than what we can think of. So if you yourself, you as a parent, you are a Muslim, you are practicing Islam, yet you are not in love with Islam, you don't love your Islam, your children are going to sense that. And your akhlaq, the way you behave among yourselves, husband and wife, and the way you treat your children will either build their self-esteem and their self-image, or it will break them. So I am big on the word akhlaq, and I know akhlaq is only one word, but it explains a whole. It's like when we look at the books in our Islamic literature, there are so many volumes written on akhlaq. I'd like to go back right to the root, that you as a parent, you know, when you wear that hijab, are you wearing it in a loving way, or are you wearing it just because I gotta wear this thing? Or when you're praying, are you praying with love, right? That it is salah time, let us all go and pray. Or you're doing it just because it's a burden, and I mean, you're taking it as a burden and you just have to do it. So all the time, whenever I talk to parents, I say, look at your own self first, how you are acting, how you are behaving towards your own self. And then the two of you, the way you are interacting, that will either build the self-image and the self-esteem of your children, or it will break.
And that's very powerful when parents come and say, how do we do this? we reflect it back and say it has to start with you and how you create
Right.
the atmosphere,
Absolutely.
the environment of safety for your child to feel safe and happy and encouraged to take on these akhlaq, whether it's through the hijab, whether it's through salah. That in a way, it's a very essential part of empowering our young boys and our young girls. Absolutely. Thank you so much, dear sister. Sister Anisa, what are your thoughts around that in terms of how do we empower young girls, and especially when we take a look at body image issues, fat shaming, and eating disorders as part of the struggles that women go through as young adults?
Well, I agree with Sister Latifa. She made some really good points there about the relationships at home and really making sure there's proper akhlaq happening right where all of this begins, all this nurturing happens. Because if there is a lot of conflict or there is a lot of shaming happening at home, abuse, emotional abuse, hurling insults, yelling, all of that, you know, the child growing up in that situation doesn't feel safe, and oftentimes they're the recipient of certain things. I, you know, remember one of my clients telling me about how her own mom would say, like, you know, you need to stop eating, you're too fat, you're, you know, you're eating too much desserts and all this. And it really affected her. She had, you know, she developed an eating disorder, you know, not surprisingly, because this was constant criticism and checking up on how much she was eating and just not eating the right things. And so one of the, when I'm doing an intake process with a client, I always ask them about what their relationship is like with their parents and what the communication was like growing up and how it is now, because it's a very good indicator to me in regard to where some of the self-esteem issues may be coming from, and how that might be affecting their confidence. And so it all connects and plays a role in your relationship with yourself. It affects your relationship with other people. So it's just a vicious cycle that, you know, when the tone at home is in such a, you know, toxic way, as Sister was talking about, it really does have a negative effect. So looking at, you know, we've got to start with the akhlaq at home more than outside. I find that people oftentimes will tell me, like kids will say, you know, my parents, they're nicer to people at the masjid than they are to me. You know, it's like, this is a problem, right? We cannot, just because we're around each other all the time at home, doesn't mean we just lose all sense of decorum and respect. That's where it needs to begin and grow from there. So it's easy sometimes to get careless just because we're around each other all the time, but we have to constantly keep ourselves in check.
There's an interesting connection I've seen in my practice as well with young women in terms of body image and hijab. And especially on the topic of social media and how they look outside with the influences that are out there and how that impacts the way they look. We know this at a general, let's say, non-Muslim community level. But then when we go a step further with the hijab, there's an interesting trend, of course, with fashion hijab versus modest hijab, but especially on young developing minds when it comes to self-esteem and self-confidence and constantly comparing themselves to people who are better looking or more rich or have it all with the fake image of what social media has out there. Let's explore this a little bit further, because I know it's so hard to get deep in all these topics. There's so much, but I think this is really important for a lot of parents and young women out there in terms of the insecurities of how you compare your body out there to other people, but then you have the hijab where you beautify it and almost in a fashionable way to look good and look more beautiful and crossing the lines of modesty. What are your thoughts on that, Sister Latifa?
I think it goes back to your self-esteem. You know, when our young girls get into the point of being confused, you know, as we say, that they want to look very good. They look at the Westerners, and then they look at hijab as if that, or the feeling comes that if I'm wearing hijab, I'm not gonna look good, right? so that the entire self-image is kind of cracked. But for those whose image, they have good self-image and good self-esteem, and we need to keep in mind that these words, we're using them loosely, but they have very, very deep rooted in us, right? When a person feels good about themselves inside, it will show outside. So even those girls who go too much into fashion, right? As long as they're not feeling good about themselves inside, the outside will show, right? So I tell people, especially when I talk to young girls, I say, make sure that you feel confident. You're confident about yourself. Make sure you build your good self-image first. You work on yourself so that no matter what color hijab you're going to wear, it will still look good on you. And it will show, because the hijab will bring out your nur, that inner nur that Allah has given to us women, right? Whatever color you're gonna wear, that nur will come out. So I'm going back to the same point that we need to work on the self-image and the self-esteem of our young people.
Absolutely, that makes so much sense in terms of when you feel good on the inside, you present it that way. But I think there's a blurring of lines here when it comes to the modesty part. If they feel good on the inside, then they express it perhaps through lots of makeup because they feel good, right? Depending on the mood. What are your thoughts on that, Sister Anisa?
Yeah, I've noticed this trend as well, and it seems like everyone is going on their own spiritual journey with not just hijab, but their relationship with Allah, right? And so what I always say is, it's not for us, to demean anyone who's dressing a certain way or that we don't agree with, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the ultimate judge. But it is concerning, of course, when you know the rules, right? There are rules for what is proper hijab, and then you're not having these conversations are not being had with your children and encouraged. Like I think it's very important to feel like you can dress beautifully and wear elegant clothing and express your own style, but without compromising, what hijab truly means. And I think there's so many ways to be creative, whether it's the style, the color of the hijab that you're wearing, or, there's so many ways to express yourself. And it certainly, if it comes to the line of compromising the hijab and compromising the intent and the purpose, it begins to create a lot of confusion. And I typically see this starting as a child begins to become a young adult and leaves the home. They go to college, they want to fit in a little bit more. Their friends wear makeup, they're going out, they're to parties and dressing. They want to do something similar as well. So I think got to have that long-term vision and goal of what the purpose is behind it and what the intention is. And these conversations have to be had throughout, not just, okay, once your child begins to wear hijab, but throughout that child's development into an adolescent, into a young woman, to constantly talk about hijab and, what are your thoughts about, hijab this way and lots of makeup, and, have these conversations so that you can guide them in a way that's correct.
Thank you. That's an important foundation I think families need to work on very young, like we said, as a young child and developing into teenagers, and having very close relationships with your daughters as mothers and even fathers, and normalizing relationships and friendships, how that's going to be in the community, whether it's with the opposite gender, how to interact. Because if we don't lay down the foundation, including sexual education for our young children, teenagers, they're going to learn this elsewhere. It needs to be taught from us how we want to teach it to our children from an Islamic perspective. And also that is related to where they're at in their maturity as well, because these are things that they're going to discover on their own, especially with access to the internet these days. And it could lead to other mental health disorders and illnesses, including addictions with drugs, as well as pornography, which we've seen within our communities as well. So these are some aspects in young adulthood, which leads us now into adulthood, where you know, you have the pressures of school, perhaps people going back to school, you have the pressures of work, you have the pressures of marriage, the challenges around that. Again, this is, each one of these is a whole topic on its own, but we just wanted to quickly explore some of these challenges. And Sister Latifa, from your perspective, what are your views when it comes to some of the mental health challenges that we have with school, work, and marriage?
So as you said, Sister, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that each and every single one of these can be tackled, what you call, separately. I see, and I strongly want to suggest this, that we need to talk more about these topics. I mean, I'm so happy that only now we've started to talk about mental health in Islamic community, but it is a topic that needs to be spoken more and more, and even marriage. Because a lot of, I mean, when we look at Islamically, we are told that marriage is half of your deen, right? Like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Man tazawwaja faqad ahdara nisfa dinihi." Whoever marries has indeed protected half of their deen, half of their faith. So if marriage is half of our faith, then we really need to talk about them. We need to discuss more about marriage. We need to know more about marriage even before we get into this. And I really don't see much going on, much talks going on marriage. So you find young people, they just look at each other, they talk, or they meet in schools or universities or in college, and then they think, okay, that's it. Let's get married.
Or online these days.
Or online these days, yeah. They think that they can just communicate on Facebook. I know a sister who is here in Toronto and is talking to the guy who's in Africa and is ready to get married. And I'm like, you think marriage works just like that? So this culture, this Western culture that has come up now, it's like totally different to what we should be or what it should be. So I highly suggest that marriage is one topic that needs to be spoken a lot. I mean, alhamdulillah, I see, for example, in some communities, especially in Khoja community, I don't know about the other communities, there are some sisters who have stepped up and they are doing like matching, right?
Yes.
But I really don't know how much that works because I've never been into it, so I don't know. But it's a good start, alhamdulillah, right? Now, when you have a sister who has already low self-esteem, who already have a very low self-image, right? They're not gonna be able to make the right choice. I feel that they'll just pick up whoever comes, whoever will give them a little bit of attention, right? Because that's exactly what they want. And the guys will say, oh, you look good. Or as soon as the guys say, oh, you look hot today, right? They'll go for it, they'll fall for it. Yet marriage has more to do than that. I mean, we are all counselors, we know that, right? We all have experience, life experiences also tells us that marriage is a lot more than just you look hot and you look nice. So things like pressure in school, things like family pressure, things like marriage, these are the things that we need to discuss more.
And looking at the impact of these stressors. For example, culturally, perhaps girls maybe not be encouraged that much to pursue an education because they're encouraged more to be mothers and homemakers. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing as well. But I find also the males are more encouraged to pursue work and career because they would have the responsibility of being the breadwinners potentially. But of course, we know nowadays that the society demands that most parents both work and have a kind of work. And also we forget from a religious spiritual point of view that our faith encourages us to pursue education, whether you're male or female, from cradle to the grave. Pursue it as far as China, as the hadith, the prophetic hadith, right? And of the Ahl Bayt alayhim salam. And so this pursuit of the education is vital also in raising the next generation. If you don't have that love for education and knowledge and the pursuit of that knowledge, then it becomes challenging to carry and to show that and encourage our children, right? So even if a female who chooses not to work later on, education is still vital for the household, so to speak, and raising the next generation. And so again, we're just scratching the surface, but we know, for example, there are women who pursue that education and then perhaps marry, and then the husband says, well, you cannot work anymore, or things like that. And I know, again, we're just touching the surface of this, but there's a lot of issues around there as well. It could impact the woman's sense of self-esteem, that I am also a contributing member to this household and the community. I can do both. And we see a lot of women juggle with that as well, right? So I'm going to skip something and come back to a bit later, but when it comes to marriage, when it comes to divorce, when it comes to being, single mothers and all of that, there's a responsibility of the household as well, right? And there are pressures around that. Before we get into the religious aspect of that, sister, what are your thoughts around that, especially Anisa, Sister Anisa, when it comes to, for example, we talked a little bit about marriage, but also being a mother perhaps, or not being able to conceive, and all sorts of things like that. It's such a big topic, but just what are your thoughts around that in terms of the impact of that on mental health?
Yeah, a lot of people think when they go into a marriage, there's that honeymoon stage in the beginning, the infatuation, it's exciting, the wedding planning, it's all new, and people are ready to just begin a new chapter of their lives. But what most people don't realize is that first year can be one of the most difficult years, and even other years of your marriage may be really challenging for many periods of times or different phases. And sometimes it might even be related to just even giving birth and having a baby, that many women go through postpartum depression in that process and end up having concerns about whether or not they can even take care of their child. Who am I? Who am I becoming? Am I going to, even in extreme cases, like, am I going to hurt my child? Because this depression really just takes over. And many times it's connected to the changing hormones that a woman will experience at that time. So it's partners, spouses, they play such an instrumental role in helping and supporting women, just as women do the same for their husbands as well. And it's up to, we've got to recognize the signs in each other. And so if some, for example, your wife has just had a baby, right? We get focused on the baby all the time, right? It's a wonderful, beautiful baby. All the friends and family, they're all about this new baby, but checking in with your wife and saying, are you okay? How can I help? How can I support you? Do you ever have times where you feel like you can't handle this? Just checking in to make sure she's okay, because so many women don't talk about this problem, but it's one that many women will experience at some point. I remember when I had my daughter, it was, there was so much joy, there was so much love that I had for her, but at the same time, it was hard because my identity was changing. I just had a C-section where I was recovering from that, having to take care of a new child, having to decide whether I'm going to sleep or eat or take a shower or what. It's so hard. You're like, I just made my life so complicated. I love this child, but what is this? It's all so new. So
sorry, Anisa, also don't forget, and the body changes after birth that happens, and the self-esteem and confidence involved with that. Not only just the hormones, but the physical changes that happen. You no longer have that pre-pregnancy body anymore, and it takes a long time for women to get back to that, or sometimes you can't because of those changes and challenges, right? The scars, the stretch marks, things like that, and the gain of weight. So that also has a huge impact on a woman's sense of self, her self-esteem, body image issues, but also her beauty as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like how you choose to look at it. I've seen lots of people reframe that and say, well, these scars, so to speak, are your battle scars, right? What you've gone through to what you've brought into this world. They're a symbol of the life that you have brought. And it's a beautiful way of reframing it. But we also have to validate the grief. There's a loss there as well, right? So I just wanted to add that to that, the body changes that occur. Yeah.
It does. And, you know, it's having a supportive partner and other family members during that time who can unconditionally show that positive regard that, you know, this is a process, this is a journey, and I'm here for you. And not, you know, unfortunately, too often I talk to couples, and one of the problems is this, that they put on weight, you know, after having 3 or 4 children, and the spouse is not happy, right? And so it's all about how you deal with these situations. Obviously, insulting, fat shaming, you know, that's not acceptable. But we want everyone to be healthy, and we want that to be the focus, because actually what the research shows is when you fat shame and you use weight discrimination, it doesn't motivate that person to change. It actually creates further problems, and that person's more likely to go from overweight to obese, or if they're already obese, to stay down that road and get even, you know, into further issues with their weight. So we've got to be really constructive how we give feedback, and even though it's well-intentioned, oftentimes it can be really destructive too.
And when we take a look at the role of hormones, whether it's postpartum depression or premenstrual dysphoric disorder or PMS in itself, there's a lot of susceptibility there in a woman's body to disabling irritability, sadness, anxiety, potentially leading up to the period or even after you have a child with a postpartum depression. What leads to this, Anisa, and how do you deal with this? What advice would you have for our viewers out there?
So I think it's what's interesting is the statistic that women are twice as more likely to struggle with depression than men are. And I was researching this question, you know, why is that the case? And what's, you know, we talked earlier about postpartum depression, the life events that women have to go through that may differ from men. Obviously, men cannot, you know, they don't give birth, but there are hormonal issues. For example, they found that estrogen might actually have a protective effect against pathology and depression. So even just decreases in estrogen levels can increase the risk of depression. So sometimes it's a hormonal issue. It's also about the way we as women have been conditioned at times to deal with our problems by internalizing it. And, you know, like sometimes I talk to clients who tell me growing up, I wasn't allowed to express my emotions. I can't show how I feel in front of my family because they fly off the handle when that happens. So if there isn't a healthy outlet, and women are just, you know, told to be subdued and patient all the time, and everything is just this utopic world, then that's not going to lead to any kind of healthy mental state. So these are some of the factors.
So what would you say to young women who are experiencing, let's say, premenstrual symptoms, and especially when it's a premenstrual dysphoric disorder? What can we do to help with that and leading up to it? But how do we manage these emotions? Because like you said, women are told to subdue basically their emotions and not encouraged to deal with this. But we also know how much it impacts their mental health when it comes to depression and anxiety. So what are some strategies you could say that young women could deal with to help manage this better?
I think first step is to become self-aware, to take account of what symptoms you're experiencing and try to notice the pattern and the cycle of when it's happening, so that you can speak in an informed way with someone that can help you. So I do think it's incredibly important to reach out to a doctor or a mental health professional that can help in dealing with that. But also other things can help. There's coping strategies like exercise, drinking lots of water, right? Using relaxation techniques, But we've got to differentiate, because a lot of times people confuse the premenstrual dysphoric disorder into PMS, right? The dysphoric disorder, part of the premenstrual, is different from that, because it's more destructive. It destroys relationships. It can really prevent you from even working. Whereas PMS, I mean, there is some overlap with premenstrual syndrome, because there is some irritability, some anxiety the week or two before the period starts. But when it comes to PDD, it's a lot more serious. So it's incredibly important to get a proper diagnosis, and if need be, you know, medication is there. There might need to be on birth control. You might need some kind of nutritional supplement. So it's just a matter of getting a proper evaluation and reaching out.
And also having the conversation with your partner, with your family, being aware can help manage that. And also not to take things so personally. I did a video on that, exploring the hormones. And if you want more details on that, you can find it on, I believe, my YouTube channel, I forget, but we're not going to spend the rest of the time talking about this. But if you do want more information on PMS and premenstrual dysphoric disorder, please do look it up, as a lot of details there in terms of the research and the hormones, inshallah. Thank you so much, Sister Anisa. And Sister Latifa, what are your views on that? Because of course, there's a spiritual and religious aspect to it, where women perhaps feel that they are not being spiritually equal, you could say, or in that state, when they're in that state where they can't fast, perhaps, or they can't do the amal during holy days because they are in a state of impurity. So what are your views on that?
So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, just to add on to postmortem depression, and then I'll go on the spiritual aspect of it. I believe that we need to train our men as well. You know, a woman needs to be very open and talk to her husband, and the spouse has to know the signs, and he has to be connected. He has to know how to support his wife, right? And not to take things personal at that time. We see that the strongest woman at the time of delivery is being challenged, you know, no matter how good you are. At that time, you know, a woman, there are 3 times of a woman's life where a woman gets challenged the most. One is when we go through our period cycle, the second time when we are delivering, and the third time when we are going through, what do you call it? When our haze is stopping. I'm looking for the word.
A menopause.
Menopause, thank you, right? These are the 3 times where a woman gets challenged the most. And we find that men don't know about it because they don't go through it, right? So they think that this woman has become bad akhlaq now. She doesn't understand me. She doesn't this, she doesn't that. So we really need to educate our men. A woman really needs to educate her husband at that time. And we need the men to listen as well. Coming to spiritual aspects of it, we have like suggestions from different scholars. I've gathered this, like what you call some points from different scholars, where they say that staying in wudu and doing wudu on a constant basis, because when you do wudu is nur, right? And wudu, because of water, the elements that it's in water, it has a calming and a soothing elements on us human being. So keeping on doing wudu all the time. Make sure that you do meditation, and with the meditation to do dhikr, right? We have a lot of adhkar, mashallah. Alhamdulillah, we are the community where we have got so many dhikr, like every single day there is one dhikr to recite, and every single hour there is a dhikr to recite. For everything we have a dhikr to recite. But the best zikr is a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. That was so beautiful.
If a woman finds, Yeah, if a woman finds that she is not able to remember any dhikr, I mean, nowadays we're all learning meditation, so you can do your meditation and calm yourself and recite salawat as many times as you can, you know, and alhamdulillah. And then also connecting ourselves with our spiritual mother, Lady Fatima, salamullah alayha, right? And ask her for help. I mean, I'm sure baby Fatima, salamullah alayha, will come for your help. So these are some of the spiritual points that, you know, I had to share on this topic.
I learned once, just to add to that, I learned once from Dr. Masuma Jafar, bless her, and it was such a beautiful point when I brought that up to her, where she reminded us that you are following Allah's orders when he says for you not to pray or fast during this time. This is a form of ibadah as well. So whenever a woman feels that she is at a disadvantage or that she is not, no, you are. And I just loved the flip of that. It's such a beautiful reframe and a reminder that you are also following Allah, because during this time, physically, you are not the same perhaps as other times because of the hormones, and you feel more fatigued and sad. And it's important when we talk about training and educating and being aware to normalize these things. If it becomes too much, to get the proper hormonal medication, using spiritual strategies as well as psychoeducational strategies to help. One more thing to add to that is food, because this is a big deal during this time when the hormonal fluctuations, how it impacts your cravings with salt and sugars and stuff. So this is where you have to up it up a little bit and really work on reducing intake of junk food during this time and balancing it more with the healthy foods, which help a lot with managing that. Absolutely. So I do have a question that came in from our audience. I'm just going to read it out loud.
Sure.
And then I'm going to ask a specific question to Sister Latifa about household before we wrap up. So the sister is saying here, thank you, dear sisters, for speaking about this very important topic. I wanted to ask your opinions. I've been noticing that many young women these days are dealing with anxiety. I don't remember it being such a big issue when I was growing up, also raised in the US. Is it just that we're recognizing it more now, or has it increased in general? What are your thoughts, Sister Anisa?
So I definitely think anxiety is on the rise, and especially given the external factors of our world and the pandemic and everything going on, the number of people coming to me with panic attacks and not able to just feel like they can function with everything happening. I've seen a significant increase in that. At the same time, you know, it has been a problem for long, you know, for since the beginning of time. People have always struggled with stress. They've struggled with anxiety, but it has changed in the sense that we're talking more about it now. Whereas before it was people would feel shamed into believing their iman was weak if they were experiencing anxiety, or just, you know, they needed, it was a spiritual deficiency. We're beginning to recognize that there is emotional intelligence, there's spiritual intelligence, there's physical well-being, there's different types of well-being. And just because a person struggles with anxiety doesn't mean they aren't also a spiritual person and, you know, care about you know, doing salawat and all of these things. And, you know, but at the same time, you know, they can do the dhikr, they can do the salat and read Quran, but still not have those tools, to the life skills to manage it in the moment. So it's something that, again, has always been around, but we're talking about it more. And yes, there are a number of factors societally that we're seeing that are contributing to increasing anxiety rates as well.
What are your thoughts, Sister Latifa? Thank you, Anisa.
I think we need to look at the causes, you know, because the causes of depression and anxiety are different, right? There's no one size fit all kind of thing, right? So our food is the major one, right? We don't have even the organic, what is called organic is not as organic as our mothers and grandmothers ate, right? So we really, really need to examine our food, especially the junk food that we are eating today. A lot of junk food is causing anxiety and depression, right? So one really, really needs to go deep and look at when I'm eating this, what kind of outcome am I getting? How am I feeling after I'm eating this? And once you notice that when you're eating something, it's not suiting you, then just keep it aside. And I know it's easy said than done, right? Sometimes it could be the social media also, right? You look at people on the social media, they have what you don't have, and then you start feeling less than them. You look at your friends, they have what you don't have, and you start feeling less than them. So it's really, really not, most of the time we need to recognize that what people upload on Facebook may not be the real life, really.
And that,
So,
yeah, then that definitely can contribute to that anxiety. And I think it's about that lifestyle. I have one more important last question to get through, which we didn't before because we were talking about hormones and bodies. I just went with that. But this is, I think, really important. And we can finish off the program with this question around responsibilities in the household and marriage. And we know there's a lot of conflict and issues around that. And also the assumptions within our cultural views about how it's a woman's job to take care of the children and the house and the house chores, basically. This is what we are brought up to believe from a cultural perspective. So we know religiously that's not the case. And then, you know, there's the joke that goes around, well, what's a woman good for then if she's not doing that? Which is a really bad joke when you hear that. But in reality, a lot of people have these attitudes, right? So sister, can you clarify and also clarify that point in terms of what are the roles and responsibilities? I know it's a huge question, but just the basics around that and what's recommended as guidelines in our faith around that to help reduce conflict.
So when we take a look at Islamically, we know that a woman is not responsible to do anything at home, right? And then if we say that a woman is not responsible, she doesn't have to do anything at home, then who's going to do the work at home, right? So this is where we take a look at the life of Bibi Fatima salamullah alayha and Imam Ali alayhi salam. We see that even though Imam Ali would be outside, but whenever he came home, he used to help Bibi Fatima. So we need to come out of this shell, right? Or this cocoon that it is a woman has to do everything, and it is a woman's job to raise children, a woman's job to change diaper, a woman's job to wash the toilet, a woman's job to vacuum, and to see a house as a family place. And we are all living in this house. We all need to do this work together. At the same time, we need to train our brothers to be able to help us at home. And we as women also, we need to let go.
Yes.
Right? When a husband is helping his wife, right? Because we women, we are coming from that mentality that it is a woman's job. We've seen our mothers doing it, so we are carrying that with us. And I hear from a lot of sisters say that, oh, my husband doesn't change diaper properly. I have to do it myself. No, let him do it. When he's doing it, let him do it. When he's helping you do housework, appreciate it. Let him do it, right? And not to jump in and say, no, you didn't do this well. And if we're also living during the times where both men and women are working full time, so then the wife would say that I work full time as well. I come home, I'm tired, or I'm taking care of the kids full time and I'm tired. So then hire somebody to clean your house. And that will solve a lot of the problems, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for your view on that. Anisa, you've got 30 seconds to give me an answer to this question before we wrap up.
I think the most powerful thing about us as women is we are shaping society. We are nurturing our children and our young boys from an early age to become, inshallah, these husbands who will help and be supporters of other women. And having said that, I agree with sister, but also that it starts from us as we become mothers, that at an early age, we're teaching and training our boys so that other, wives don't have to train their husbands when they're adults. So if you create that system where everyone in the house has a role to play, everyone takes part in cooking, cleaning, doing everything from a young age, they grow into young adults, inshallah, who will be supportive husbands and spouses and take on these responsibilities. And that's where our power lies in so many ways, in addressing it in childhood.
Beautifully said. So beautiful and empowering and to the point. And whether you are a mother, whether you are a wife or not, we all have a role as Muslim women to play in contributing to our growing society and to the next generation, no matter what your status is, right? And it's so important that it does start from your own home, whether you have a family or not, single, married, divorced, widowed, elderly, young. We all have this important role to contribute, inshallah, for the awaited Imam, inshallah. So I think we always forget the perspective, right? And to bring it back and to summarize everything, we have to understand that we are shaping society, inshallah, like Sayyidah Khadija did, our ultimate role model, inshallah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, my dear, dear sisters. It was lovely seeing you. You two are amongst my favorite women that I know. It's such an honor to speak with you and connect with you. And like we said, we just scratched the surface of this iceberg because there's so much around these topics, and we just touched a little bit on each one of them. Inshallah, we'll have the opportunity to explore them in more depth. Thank you again, my dear sisters. Thank you for our partners, the Nasiha hotline that you could use here in North America anytime. Both men and women can access the support. Thank you to Ahlul Bayt TV, as well as partners, for broadcasting these important mental health topics within our community. And NASIMCO and myself, thank you for joining us, and inshallah join us again in 2 weeks' time, where again we will have amazing panelists exploring other mental health topics with NASIMCO Mental Health. Have a beautiful weekend. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.